Test. And we are
Rested.
almost there. Marshall joining the live. Hello, Herd Men's Soccer. Yo, hi. We got a lot of comments in there. Where's Maria? She's almost there. There she is.
Hey, how we doing?
Good. How are you? Set up like at a mute. That wasn't it. That one. You can hear me?
I can hear you great. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Hello, everyone here on Instagram and YouTube Live. Andrew McDevitt for NCAA Digital across the country in Atlanta. For NCAA.com, it's Maria Howell. Don't forget, she starred at Georgia State. Was it center back?
Center back, little center mid, a little bit of both. But yes, I did play 4 years of Division I soccer. I'm unfortunately now retired, only playing some rec soccer here and there.
I saw you won a championship like yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah, Division 3 co-ed league. So shout out to my teammates. It's a lot of fun when there's no pressure and you're out of college. So yeah.
Still loving the game. I love that for you. Good for you. I don't have anywhere near that soccer experience in my background, so it's good to talk with someone that definitely knows what they're talking about. Maria, what a great week for soccer. If you're a soccer fan, especially a college soccer fan, you got games all day long, tomorrow, all weekend long. I can't wait. The Field of 48 announced on Monday. Was there anything that stood out to you, anything that shocked you about this year's tournament?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a big difference between men's and women's. As we saw with the women's, there's so many more teams to begin with. But I think that one big difference in men's is that, the top teams are all reachable. As we saw in the bracket, there was not one seeded team that's undefeated. And I think that 0 in that middle column really just signifies the parity of men's college soccer this season. We saw late in the season some huge upsets. Marshall they had a 12-game win streak and that got taken away from them. Same thing, Kentucky turned around and beat West Virginia. And then in conference tournaments, we saw, UCF and Notre Dame fall as well. So I think the main thing to notice here and to look forward to in this tournament is to be surprised, because really, as we've seen, the top teams are all reachable.
Just feels like the possibility for parity is so much greater in this tournament than in the women's tournament. 10 of the top 11 scoring offenses in the country are in this Field of 48. Only Drexel was left out. So what that means to me is just there's going to be a ton of goals, which means that craziness can happen. Anybody can beat anybody. And it could be a ton of fun as we head into the later rounds. Anything surprise you seeding-wise, teams that were on the outside looking in, things of that nature?
Yeah, I mean, I think one surprise that might not be so surprising, but worth mentioning, is Syracuse is not even seeded, the defending national champs. They're going to have an uphill battle if they want to make another deep run into the tournament, but I don't think we were super surprised to see that. They had a rocky season, but what was your take on that, Andy?
I wasn't too surprised that Syracuse was unseeded. Like you said, up and down, ton of ties, tough to weigh those ties. They lost to Cornell, a team that's not in the Field of 48. I wasn't too surprised with where Syracuse ended up, but as we'll talk about a little bit later on, being unseeded where they are, probably not the worst spot that you could be. Another thing that not necessarily was surprising to me, but certainly was surprising to the soccer community, was that Penn State was on the outside looking in. I think they were 10-4-8. Good. It wasn't 8. It was less than that. 10-4-3. It was a good season for them. But losing in that Big Ten championship game was clearly the difference. We saw that Indiana was the only team from the Big Ten in the field, and similar to like what you said with Syracuse, made a run to the national championship last year, won the Big Ten this year, and unseeded. Not a lot of great competition in the Big Ten this year. Unfortunate for Penn State to be left out. I think that the reason why they were left out was because the very last team, the very last at-large bid announced was Kentucky. Kentucky in the middle of October felt like they were dead in the water. They had 4 straight ties. I think there were 2 or 3 games below 500. They went on a crazy run, beating Marshall and West Virginia, 2 of the top 5 seeds in this tournament. And then they find their way into the Field of 48, potentially as that last team in. We don't really know, but they're in, and that could be the reason why the Nittany Lions are still in Happy Valley and don't have a chance to play this upcoming weekend.
Yeah, we cannot tell. Obviously the committee has their decisions, and I think it's like you said, the margin of error is so thin here, and it's anybody's game. So as we saw, Kentucky is in. They had those great upsets that were definitely exciting to watch, and maybe they'll have some more into the tournament. Who knows? So let's talk about that first round.
Yeah, first round, there are a ton of great matchups. As you know, in the men's tournament, the seeded teams are the teams that have a bye. The top 16 teams will not play until Sunday. I think it's Sunday. Yeah, Sunday it is. Thursday is the unseeded teams, a bunch of teams that are conference champs, a bunch of teams that, despite not being seeded, had incredible seasons. Maria, you tell me, who is your number one first round matchup to watch?
So I'm going to throw some love to SIU Edwardsville. They're a one-loss team, and like we said before, there was not any seeded teams that were undefeated or one-loss teams, actually. I think the lowest loss record for the seeded teams was a 2-loss record. So SIU Edwardsville, they're the only undefeated team. They are undefeated. That's my bad. They're only undefeated
No, you're right.
team.
You said that.
Okay. They currently have the longest win streak in the country with 9 wins, and their goalkeeper Sam Gomez is actually ranked 3rd in the country. He's only allowed 10 goals in this season. So their first round matchup is against Memphis. I definitely think it's going to be a great matchup. You know, Memphis has had a solid season, and they've actually crumbled a few times under pressure. They lost twice against SMU, so definitely think that that's a game that can go either way.
I got myself in trouble with the Memphis fans picking against the Tigers in the women's bracket. I thought long and hard about this one because, like you said, SIUE, the only undefeated team in the league, in the field of 48, but it doesn't feel like they played the same level of competition as some of the other teams in this tournament, Memphis being one of them, like you said, playing SMU, beating SMU. SMU is one of the premier teams in this field. I'm going to take Memphis in that matchup. Are you going to surprise me? Pick an unseeded team? I mean, pick an upset?
We don't know. Yeah, I think I'm going upset. You know, we saw in the women's tournament last week, the defending champs went down in the first game. I talked about it a lot last week. Tournament time, teams can be a different team when they show up. So whoever wakes up that day and wants it more can have a really big advantage.
There you go. I like it. That's a fun first round matchup and definitely a fun upset pick from Maria Howell. My first round matchup, and ironically enough, another upset pick, is on the other side, Charlotte versus High Point. The 49ers, the American Athletic Conference champs, High Point, the Big South Conference champs. Two really fun teams that both had 3 losses. The 49ers only lost twice. They lost to SMU and FIU, 2 ranked opponents, and then they had one that was not in the field of 48. But the Panthers only lost 3 games, and their losses were to Marshall on the road, Virginia Tech on the road, and UVA on the road. Marshall and UVA are seeded teams. High Point, the Panthers, great year. I'm taking the upset on that side. I'm taking High Point over Charlotte in the first round.
All right. I'd like to see that. I guess we'll find out. Another fun.
Go ahead.
I think I agree with you there. Yeah, I think we'll just wait and see. But I was just going to throw the ball over to Kentucky. You know, we spoke about them a little bit in the beginning, and I think that they're going to come out on fire. Like you said, they weren't having a great beginning of their season. They've really kind of turned over a new leaf in this back end of the season. So I think their first round matchup against Xavier is going to be pretty huge. If there's any team that's going to deliver an upset, it's going to be Kentucky, as we saw. So what do you think about Xavier
getting in on peak? Yeah, Xavier got in on PK's PK win over Georgetown. There is the potential that they would have got in as at-large bid. But like you said, Kentucky, Johan Sedegren, what a job he did to right this ship. This team had a ton of transfers. That could be part of the reason why it took a little bit of time for the Wildcats to gel. But man, to have to see them in the first round, that would be scary, red hot. They lost to Marshall in the Sun Belt Conference tournament. That's not like a bad loss at all. Obviously, the number 1 seed overall. I'm with you. I picked Kentucky in the first round. I think that that's another one that you circle. I had one more to circle as a first round matchup, and that was a team that we talked about a little bit earlier, made a run to the College Cup final last year, lost in PKs, made a run, won a Big Ten championship this year. Indiana, it felt like a slow start, but the Hoosiers figured it out. They'll have a tough first-round matchup. The A-Sun champs, Lipscomb, Tyrese Spicer, one of the premier goal scorers in the country. It felt like he had a chance to be the top guy all season long, finished with 14, one off that pace. Lipscomb is dangerous. They score goals at a wild margin. Indiana is certainly red hot. Two conference champs. I love this matchup. Unfortunately for Lipscomb, I think Indiana is just ready to do this again and feels a little bit slighted. I think the Hoosiers could be in a position to make a little bit of a run.
I agree with that, Andrew. Indiana, they've made it to the finals 3 times, I think, in the last 6 championships. So I don't see this.
Correct.
I can definitely see them making a deep run this year. That's a program that really feeds off of high energy situations, and they have such a fan group that is like so diehard, and so Indiana fans go crazy. Definitely helps when it comes to tournament time. So I definitely think that's going to be a game to watch. But yeah, I vote Indiana as well.
Another nice note about the Hoosiers, Malone Gumbale was the guy last year that missed a PK in that College Cup final. He has been on a tear down the stretch. He was the NCAA Digital Men's Soccer Player of the Week a couple of weeks ago, scored a ton of goals in the Big Ten Conference tournament. He's a force. It's good to see him coming on and not letting that big moment really stress him in the next season. And it'd be nice to see him to get another opportunity. So those were our first round matchups to watch. That sets us up into some matchups maybe later in the tournament that we might want to see. Maria, you got anyone circled down the line, maybe later this weekend, maybe into next week?
So might be into next week. Some things got to happen to make this happen, but I really would love to see Clemson Syracuse in third round. I think Clemson's a really strong team this year. Then obviously we got Syracuse coming off their win. But they played each other once this season. And at the time, Clemson was ranked number 21 and Syracuse was number 10. And they tied 1-1. And if you look at the box score, it kind of tells a pretty interesting story. Only 3 shots on goal for Clemson and 4 for Syracuse. As we've seen in other games for Clemson, that's pretty low for them.
Yeah.
And as much as we talked about Syracuse not being seeded, they shouldn't be discounted. They've got offensive spark plug, I'm going to mispronounce it, Giorgio Kokevsky. And some I'm sorry, Giorgio, but I think that he's got plenty of assists this season. He's a player that's really going to rile up the offense and going to make a lot of plays. So I definitely think if that matchup were to happen, it would be a very interesting game to watch. Clemson Syracuse. What do you think?
It's one that I had setting up in my bracket, like you said, to hold Clemson to 3 shots. That was wild. They were one of the most exciting teams in the ACC all year. I would have a ton of fun if that was the matchup that showed up in the third round in that top left quadrant. I'd probably take Clemson just because I think they had the better year. I think they're more explosive. But yeah, I would love to see that. I think that's a great call by you, Maria.
I actually had a question for one of your predicted matches.
Okay.
You had mentioned Duke versus Virginia in the third round, and I know that's a game that already happened this season. NCAA Digital was there on the field. So can you talk to us a little bit about what it was like to be on scene there? I think that game was at Duke, and then for the tournament, it'll be Virginia hosting. So was there some energy you picked up on, something maybe the camera didn't show? Talk to us about that.
It feel like what the score said it was, 2-0
Okay.
Duke. It was kind of that type of game. They controlled the ball. They controlled possession. But the thing about Duke with those 2 massive strikers up top in Bjornsson and Ajago is just they can strike from anywhere at any point. They can have a defender with the ball and set it up top. One of those guys makes a nice play to hold it up, kick out wide, and then the other guy's running back post. They're scary big up top. Both of those guys north of 6'2", maybe even 6'3". We were at Duke, met both of them. They are large gentlemen. I think that poses a problem not only for UVA, but teams that they may see later on in the tournament, earlier in the tournament. Duke's 2 big guys up top will be problematic. And that kind of set up, like you said, that was one of my predictions in that bottom right quadrant. The bottom right quadrant could set up in the third round to be all ACC. UVA versus Wake, 7 versus 10 up top. And then down the bottom, the 2 seed Notre Dame versus the 15 seed Duke. You already said it, hinting at it. I picked Virginia and Duke to win those 2 games. Rematches, some of them are rematches. UVA and Wake, ironically enough, did not play in the ACC regular season or the postseason tournament. So it'd be fun to see that conference matchup in the third round. All ACC third round matchups, the one that you mentioned with Syracuse and Clemson, and then the 2 that I just mentioned in the bottom right quadrant. Those would be a ton of fun. And then the other one that I wrote down would be way down the line. This would be in Louisville. We'll be there. You don't have it in your bracket because you have one of these teams losing earlier. West Virginia, a Sun Belt rematch. I have them playing Marshall for the third time this year in Louisville. The home team is 2-0. When they played the Mountain State Derby in West Virginia, record crowd. I think it was close to 3,500 people. The Mountaineers won that game 5-2. Then Sun Belt Championship game, they go back to Huntington and play in Marshall's house. They get the job done 3-2. Man, if we could see that for a third time, it would be so awesome. I didn't mention West Virginia earlier. The 4 1 seeds felt fairly appropriate. 2 of them were conference runner-ups, as was West Virginia, and West Virginia lost to the #1 team in the tournament. I really do think that West Virginia is the second best team in the tournament. Unfortunately for them, they would run into the best team in the tournament before they get to play for a championship game. I really hope that we get to see that in Louisville. That is my #1 matchup that I have circled, hoping on my wish list that we get to see the Mountain State Derby for a third time.
I definitely think that would be a great matchup. Every time they've played, it's been a high-scoring game. It's gone both ways. There's equalizers, then you think one team's going to like finish it out, and then they turn around and the other team scores. So definitely a good matchup. But I've got a different prediction in mind. So I don't think that West Virginia makes it out of the third round. I think it's going to be a huge matchup, West Virginia, UCF, in the third round. They played each other once before in this season, also tied 2-2. 6 shots on goal apiece and 3 yellow cards apiece. So that's going to be a chippy game if it does happen. We love to watch a game that's, back and forth like that. Obviously, we don't encourage yellow cards and fouls and misbehavior, but that's always a fun game to watch. And when the emotions are high like that, I think people play their best, or they crumble underneath that pressure and they might, not play as well. But I do have UCF winning that game. I have a lot of faith in UCF's Lucas Dorado. He steps up in big moments, and I think that, that's going to be a big moment between West Virginia and UCF. And like I said, certain players step up when, temperaments get high and emotions get high, and certain players go the other way. So I got UCF beating West Virginia in the third round.
I'll just counter you and say big players stepping up in big moments. Marcus Caldera scored a hat trick in that game at home against Marshall. That game that you mentioned, the rematch between West Virginia and UCF, happened in Orlando. The 2 guys that we just talked about, Dorado and Caldera, both found the back of the net. That would be a ton of fun. It could go either way. And then either one of those teams could potentially face the #4 seed Georgetown before they get another potential rematch with the Sun Belt champs, Marshall. The Sun Belt, or as many people deemed it this year, the Fun Belt, was one of the best conferences in the country, and it would only be fitting to see those 2 teams, either Marshall and UCF or Marshall and West Virginia, face off in Louisville for a chance to go play for a trophy. I like those matchups, Maria. That's good stuff. And do you have any more future ones, or should we step on over to sleeper teams?
I think we can step on over to sleeper teams for sure. And I just want to throw some more love to the Sun Belt. Like you mentioned before, I did play for Georgia State. We played in the Sun Belt, and it's the best conference in the country. Little did you know.
Is that a good nickname? Like, do you guys call it the Fun Belt? Yeah.
I will say this is the first time I've ever heard that.
Oh, wow.
But maybe it hasn't been as fun other years until this year. So Fun Belt.
It was fun this year. It was fun.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, that's good stuff. Sleeper teams. I don't know. I kind of went all over the place with this. I picked a ranked team, a seeded team as a sleeper team. I don't think that exactly fits. I'll let you go first so that I can base my first sleeper team off of your sleeper team.
Yeah, so I don't know if we've mentioned them before yet, but sleeper team Western Michigan. I think they've got a great player in Charlie Sharp, and Singh as well. The Missouri Valley regular season and tournament champs. They got one taste of losing at the beginning of the season against Vermont. It was their first game after exhibition matches, and they haven't lost since. So I think they're coming in with a lot of momentum. We talk a lot about Charlie Sharp. I think you mentioned him in your predictions video. He's the leading goal scorer, but there's also Dylan Singh, who has 6 game-winning goals, and I think he has only 1 less goal than Charlie Sharp. So when the team needs him, Dylan Singh is there. Charlie Sharp sets it up for him, scores a few, and then Dylan Singh finishes it off. So I definitely think that Western Michigan is a great team to watch. they're going to have to match up against Duke, which I know you're Team Duke, so who knows? But I definitely think they're a team that is not seeded and definitely has a lot of potential.
Top goal scorers in the country race was very bizarre because there were so many guys that ended up with 15, 14, and 13 goals. Charlie Sharp is the only 15 goal scorer in the field of 48, so he is the top goal scorer there. You said Dylan Singh, he had 14. Duke's Forrester Jago also had 14. So yeah, there are guys out there that scored a ton of goals. And the other thing, like, have you seen Forrester Jago's celebration? Dude's always having fun. Yeah. When we were at Duke, we had the rest of his teammates impersonate that celebration. It's fun. He gets everyone involved. That's fun for the viewers to watch. That's fun for me as a fan to watch. And those guys will certainly not provide any shortage of goal scoring in that second round matchup. I like that pick for you as sleeper teams. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we love that.
I saw there were certainly other teams that they played throughout the year that when they scored goals, they hit the same celebration.
Players love to throw back at you, but I will say,
it's kind of how it goes.
Yeah, I mean, having that kind of positivity though, and creating your own little personality on the field, I think is huge and really helps a team kind of like mesh together and create a team personality, create a team mantra, and just overall helps a team get closer when they have, these common little celebrations and unique
something
things.
fun. Yeah. One of my sleeper teams, underrated teams, an unseeded team. I'll pick one of those first. I went with Bryant Bulldogs, top 10 in the country in total points. They're in that top right quadrant. They'll play Yale in the first round. If they advance, they'll play Hofstra in the next round, which Hofstra was a really good team. They won their conference. Elliot Goldthorpe had a free kick in overtime to win that conference crown. So impressive to them. But I do think there is a chance that Bryant wins a pair of games, ends up in the third round and sees UNC. I don't know if that game's necessarily winnable, but Yale and Hofstra, no knock on Hofstra, there's a very good chance that they could send the Bulldogs packing in the second round. But that was one of my sleeper teams. I have 3 others written down. Do you have any others, or should I just rattle them?
Well, I was just going to comment on Bryant. They're a first-time team in the tournament, which is also huge. We would love to see a first-time team make a deep run, and I think that there's a lot to be said for a team who's here for the first time. They're going to come in with an attitude that, obviously they're happy to be here, but they have something to prove, and, they want to make the story even better. And they want to make history twice by winning the first game of their first appearance. So
only one loss. Yeah, only one loss all season long for Bryant. So sleeper team because they're unseeded, but not necessarily sleeper when you count the records. They've been here all year long.
Yeah.
My other 2, speaking of been here all year long, they're unseeded, but they could win a pair of games, both of them. They faced off last year for the College Cup, Syracuse and Indiana. Syracuse will face Boston University in the first round, then another regional rivalry, if you will, with New Hampshire in the second round, and could get to the third round to face Clemson, like we mentioned before, another ACC matchup. New Hampshire, definitely nothing to scoff at, but they're also not accustomed to seeing a team like Syracuse that made a run and won a national championship last year. They played Vermont this year, the Wildcats did, but Syracuse is ready and they're battle tested. I think that they could make a run. Indiana on the other side, we already talked about Lipscomb, could see Wake Forest in the second round. I don't know if they beat Wake Forest, but Indiana, man, if I'm Wake Forest, that is not a team that I would be happy to see in my part of the draw. Like you said, 3 of 6 College Cup finals they've lost, but they make runs, and I wouldn't want to see them. The last one that I had written down as a sleeper team, it's tough to be a sleeper team, is the 11th seed, but Portland. I got Portland making a run all the way to Louisville. I've watched Portland all year long. When I've gone to campuses, people ask, who are you going to pick off the beaten path? And Portland has been my answer throughout the year. 2 times they had a player named NCAA Digital Player of the Week, Jacob Babalai and Kevin Bonilla. Bonilla from defense is one of the premier creators in the country, sending in like goofy curling balls that just always end up perfectly on one of his teammates' heads or foots on the back post. Like both of those guys. And then you throw in Fofana as another alternate scorer. I have Portland making a run all the way to Louisville and facing off against Duke for a right to head to the College Cup finals. Any thoughts on the 3 that I just threw out you rapid fire?
I love a sleeper team that's already
Seeded.
seeded, that helps them not be a sleeper team. But no, I think they're great picks. I think Portland's definitely one to watch. They've been fun to watch all season, and yeah, I think that you said they were going to the College Cup against Duke. That'll definitely be, a great matchup. Maybe some of this, maybe not. We
Cross
don't know.
country too. You get both coasts represented on that side, whereas my prediction on the other side was from one conference, and so was yours. So it'd be fun to see a little bit of difference and variety from both coasts. That leads us into our top players. We already talked about a handful of them with Charlie Sharp, Dylan Singh, Forrester Ajago. Earlier, before we got on the stream, you wanted to talk about the other guy for Duke, and that's Ulfi Bjornsson. Tell me a little bit about him.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's amazing to see a freshman come in and just make such an impact immediately on the team. He has 10 goals on the season, 4 of them are game winners, and he scored in the last 4 games. So he's got some momentum in his favor, and he definitely has this maturity to him to be a freshman to come in and score these goals. So I definitely think he's one to watch for Duke. I know you love Duke, so another great player there.
Now I'm getting this, like, I love Duke. Like, I like Duke. I think Duke had a good year. I think that they're entertaining. Their social team did a good job. He was labeled as the wolf, and then little do people know this is actually a bear. I don't know how he gets a
Okay.
bear from that. So you got the wolf and the bear up top, like big game hunters. They're going out there and they're making runs at it.
I
Those
love
are
it.
4 guys that could face off in the second round between Western Michigan and Duke. I wrote down some other guys that aren't necessarily goal scorers. We talk a lot about the goal scorers. I like Zach Bohane from Stanford. He was tied for 7th in the country, double-digit assists. He does a great job of creating. And if you caught Stanford's regular season finale, boy, oh boy, did they score 2 bangers. An absolute rip from close to midfield, and then a bike kick from Fisher in close. Stanford hasn't been talked about on this stream until this point. They were the last seeded team. Tough that you could then see Marshall in your second matchup in the third round. But I think Stanford is very poised to be a team that could give Marshall a really good game, in part because of Zach Bohane and his ability to create from the midfield.
Yeah. And speaking also of players who aren't goal scorers, I know you had your top saves for the women, shouting out all those goalkeepers. We love that. I mentioned him earlier for SIU Edwardsville. Sam Gomez, their goalkeeper, he's ranked 3rd in the country for goals against average. He's got 0.528 goals against average. But also, the number 1 goalkeeper is from Bryant, which we mentioned earlier as well as a sleeper team. Their goalkeeper is doing great. He's leading the country in goals against average. He's only let in 5 this season. So that's definitely going to give them a boost to help make a run in their first appearance in the NCAA.
You can always count on Maria Howell to shout out the goalkeepers. Thank you, Maria.
Of course.
The last one, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention this guy. You talked about him before. He's one of the most exciting players in the country. He was tied for the nation's lead in assists. No, he led the nation with 12 assists. He also tacked on 9 goals. That's pretty darn good. And that is Matthew Bell from Marshall. He has been electric. Anytime you turn on a Thundering Herd game, number 10 is front and center, creating, scoring. Tell me a little bit more about what you got on Matthew Bell.
Yeah, I mean, he's an assist machine. Like, he's dishing out balls whenever he can. That's the type of player that an offense needs. He scores plenty of his own goals, but he's not afraid to just share the ball. And I think that men's soccer sometimes has this like chatter around it that a lot of guys are ball hogs. You get out of college soccer and you go out and you play co-ed league or whatever, and the guys are the ones who sometimes they want to show off a little bit. They're a little more prideful, but a player like Matthew Bell, who's such a giver and he's always distributing the ball, is really necessary on a team, especially with so many big players. Marshall obviously has an amazing front line, and to have someone like Matthew Bell there dishing the ball out is amazing. And I mean, can you imagine like having a hand in 21 goals of the season? Marshall's got 52 on the season, which is already insane. But Matthew Bell has a hand in almost half of those goals. So that's definitely a very, very valuable player to have.
you've thrown out the stat about game-winning goals for a handful of different players. I don't know about game-winning assists as a stat, but I'm sure Matthew Bell would be fairly highly rated up there in that category. And shout out to the Herd. I saw them in the comments dropping the bell emojis. That's another good emoji. Look at these creative teams, man. You find one little thing and you can just drop it in there every time. I love it. I will do it right now. Shout out to a ton of the creative teams around the country. They have made my job exponentially easier. And it's really crazy for me to see, just the growth in what those creative teams have done for sports around the country, and really not just in soccer, just in all sports outside of those major sports that we see on the major networks all the time. It's been really cool to see these programs featured at a high level and see great camera work and great editing and great graphics from the creative teams around the country. So shout out to them. And Matthew Bell leads us perfectly into our final little segment before we take some of your questions. So if you have some questions, drop them in the chat here on Instagram or as well on YouTube. We got some people that'll be dropping in. Ooh, I like that one. Who's the best coach in the country? Maybe we'll come back to that. I like that. Yeah. But let's talk about our favorite Final Four predictions, our college cup predictions, the final remaining teams in this bracket. I've already put mine out. You can find that on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, NCAA.com. I picked Marshall, West Virginia on one side, Portland, Duke on the other side. Marshall advancing to face Duke in the College Cup final in Louisville, Lynn Family Stadium. I'll be there. Maria will be there. And I believe the Herd will add a second star to their kit. That 2020 championship. A lot of people, sports fans and other leagues, especially I love to see it for the Lakers. They throw out that that's a bogus championship in 2020. Well, guess what? If you were claiming that the Herd's championship was not real in 2020, here's one in 2023. How's that? That's the truth. That's for real.
I guess we'll see, because my College Cup looks a little bit different. As I mentioned earlier, I had UCF beating West Virginia a little bit earlier on. And so I've got in the semis from the left side of the bracket, Marshall versus UCF. And I have UCF winning. Hot take. Marshall's a great team. Obviously, they're both great teams. But there's a little bit of history between this matchup. UCF lost only 1-0 this season, which is a very narrow loss for a team like Marshall. They put teams to sleep, and for UCF, it was just a 1-0 loss. And we know, like I said, how high scoring Marshall usually is. But before that, the two teams hadn't actually played in 11 years. Back in 2012, they battled, was scoreless almost the entire game. 89th minute, UCF won 1-0 with 3 seconds left on the clock. So I think it's going to be a pretty interesting matchup if they make it to the College Cup, obviously. And when they played this season, Marshall handed UCF their first loss, as we know. And it was also in that game, they were down 1-0, but in the last minute of the game, UCF actually did score, but then it was deemed a foul because it was a slide tackle or whatever. It went to VAR. I think that, it was the big mess at the end of the game. But I will say it came down to the wire. So I definitely think if this is a College Cup match in the semis, it'll come down to the wire and it'll be a great game. And I have UCF making that final push and winning that. And then on the right side of the bracket, I've got UNC versus Wake. I think UNC is I think we've talked about them a little bit, but they're a great team. They have one of the lowest goals against average in the country. We mentioned a few of those goalkeepers. UNC's goalkeeper is second in the nation for goals against average. He's only let in 7 this season. Having a back line like that really helps push you deep into the tournament. So I've got UNC versus Wake Forest. I've got UNC winning. And then I've got the finals in Louisville on December 11th, UCF versus UNC. I'm team UCF, so we'll see how it goes. But like I said, I'm a big UCF fan. I think that they've got a lot of heart to their team. I think they've got a pretty depth in roster, and historically, they've showed up in last minute moments, and that's what counts sometimes.
He's a Sun Belt homer. Don't let her fool you. No, just kidding. I like the pick. And Marshall was in the comments letting you know, Maria, we're right here. So I respect that from you. In the face of adversity, just let it fly. The one thing that I will say that bodes well for you and does not bode well for me and does not bode well to our friends that have been in the comments throughout the stream, appreciate their engagement. But I got this stat from College Soccer News on Twitter. Only one number one seed has advanced to the College Cup since 2012, and the last one seed to win it was UNC in 2011. So shout out College Soccer News for that stat. Makes me feel like maybe I should revise my bracket, but I feel good about it. I feel good about the Thundering Herd. That's an interesting stat. It would be first time in over a decade that has been pulled off by the number one seed. The other thing that I wanted to comment on about your prediction for UNC being in the College Cup was that I love some of their guys up top. Quincy Armand has scored goals in big moments, a transfer from Seton Hall, I believe. And then Ernest Bawa, another guy on the wing that's done a great job of creating goal-scoring opportunities for the Tar Heels. They kind of had an interesting season where they were quiet, overlooked early on. When we made a trip to UNC in early September, they weren't ranked. I don't even think they were receiving votes. Then they had a really big win right around the midway part of the season over Duke, and that kind of springboarded them for what we saw the rest of the way for the Tar Heels. I like your prediction, Maria. I like that we got through all of our points. I saw a couple comments, couple questions. I like the best coach question. I'll tie that into another question that I got. Penn State was another question that I got. How were they left out? I think that that's a great coach up there in Happy Valley. I feel unfortunate for them that they got left out, but there are a ton of great coaches in this tournament. You look at Indiana, you look at Kentucky, you look at Syracuse, guys that have been there before, done this for a while, but then you look at some of the newer guys, West Virginia, a younger coach, Denver. I was out at a Denver game earlier this year. Denver has been riddled with injuries, and for them to get in as an at-large bid, despite a loss in the Summit League to a team that they beat twice this year in Kansas City, just kind of a testament to what the Pioneers have been about and facing adversity. So that kind of me touching on those questions. Any thoughts on great coaches around the country, Maria?
Yeah, I mean, one just comes to mind. I talked about Bryant a little bit earlier. They've got a coach who hasn't been there very long, and they're in the tournament now, which is great. But yeah, I think the main thing, just a note on coaches in general, a coach's attitude has such a big, impact on their team. Finding that balance between being a positive coach, obviously you want to inspire your team and your players, but at the same time, having that kind of hard edge to know when to push them, when to give positive feedback, when to maybe give a little bit more negative feedback, obviously in a respectful way. But coaches, when you're watching the game, you might not hear them, but they're on the sideline. I always think it's interesting to see which coaches are the silent kind that just sit in their chair. They got their arms crossed, let the players do what they need to do. And then there's other coaches who are way more involved. And then you've got the coaches who are yelling at the refs. So I think it's always interesting to, in the middle of a game, take a look over on the sideline, see what the coaches are doing. I think that can a lot of times tell you a lot about what kind of team it is and the kind of identity that coach is building within that team.
Didn't drop any names because I knew that I would just be wildly inaccurate in any of the names that I threw out, maybe mispronouncing them. But yeah, a ton of great coaches around the country. I've been looking maybe for a couple more comments. UCLA was a third. UCLA is a team that we didn't mention at all, a ranked team down the bottom. 13 seed, great year in the Pac-12, beat Stanford late in the year, another seeded team. There's a chance that UCLA could make a run. I had some people hit me up in my Instagram messages talking that UCLA could be a College Cup team making a run all the way to Louisville. We'll see. The Bruins were for real, no doubt about it.
Yeah. I think big takeaway from this is, we're just two people chatting about soccer, and nobody should take our opinions, as facts. It's always fun to chit chat and obviously we look at stats and we look at, we've been watching all season. So our opinions are our own, but I'm excited to see if our opinions turn into fact into the tournament. It's going to be a great tournament, and it's starting tomorrow.
Yes, it is. I'm going to respond to two more things that I saw in the comments before I hint at what's going on tomorrow. FIU was a question. When I think about FIU, I think the Panthers had a great year. They played a gauntlet of a schedule, played a ton of teams that are playing in this tournament. They'll be well prepared for what they're going to face. They'll see Mercer in the first round. I think that FIU probably advances past the Bears, but then they would see Virginia in the second round. That might be a little bit of a step up. I like FIU. I'm not sure if I like them enough to pick them over UVA, but I definitely like the Panthers. The other question that I saw, and Maria might have a better perspective on this because of her playing career, and maybe she might be a little bit biased and say Georgia State, but that's okay. One of the questions was, what's your favorite stadiums around the country? What's your favorite college soccer stadium? Again, I have not been to anywhere near the number that Maria have been to. I can say this, stadium-wise, I loved UNC's and I loved Pitt's. I thought that they were both beautiful facilities. The best atmosphere that I've been to thus far was at South Carolina. There was a game at South Carolina where they were hosting UNC. The atmosphere for those intros were second to none. It was electric in Columbia. South Carolina, a really, really good program. That was one of the most fun things that I saw this year. But yeah.
Well, that's a great question. Best stadiums. I think it's a tough one because I played in the Sun Belt Conference. Sun Belt for the women's is not as amazing as the men's. You know, we might not be called the Fun Belt, but still great teams in there. But I will say, I mean, when it comes to stadiums equals funding, and not every school has the best funding, even though they might have great players. So I kind of want to say I haven't been to the best stadiums in the country just because the teams we played against may not have had the same budget as some of the bigger schools like South Carolina and UNC. Obviously, I mean, they've got state-of-the-art stadium. I love my stadium at Georgia State. I will say it has to be my favorite. We've got it's like a city vibe. You've got the MARTA, which is the train here, the subway system goes right over our field, and then you've got the helicopter like going to Grady Hospital right next door. So I think the environment around a stadium can put it up when maybe, you know, they don't have the best stands or whatever. The environment that the fans bring, the environment that the players bring, that the coaches also bring, that the whole program brings, can really make a stadium stand out to me. So I definitely think the Georgia State Stadium, you know, when it's packed, it's awesome. And when you got the train going by, it like invigorates you because you can't hear anything. It's like all these like slow motion moments because all you hear is like the train going by. And you're just like, yeah, I'm in a movie. This is amazing. But yeah, I gotta go with Georgia State.
Homer. That's all there is to it. Sunbelt Homer. I know this. The atmosphere at Lynn Family Stadium for the College Cup will be electric. We know it's a great stadium. NCAA Digital swung through there on our early season road trip. So if you're a soccer fan, get your tickets now. Be there. I don't have the date right there. Oh, December 11th is the final. December 8th is the semifinal of the College Cup. But it all gets started tomorrow, and it gets started at 1 o'clock Eastern time. For me out here in the Mountain Time, that means I have some morning NCAA soccer action. It'll go on all day long, kickoffs all day long, up until 10 o'clock Eastern time. UC Irvine goes to Loyola Marymount, and San Diego hosts Cal Baptist all day long. Maria and I will be watching. Hit us up on Twitter and Instagram. Make sure you're following along on NCAA.com and right here on NCAA Soccer on Instagram. You can also check us out on Twitter and Facebook. Maria, thank you so much. It's been fun. We don't have any more brackets to talk about, but who knows? Maybe like before the College Cup, we'll hop on Instagram and talk about it, huh?
Yeah, maybe when we're at the College Cup, we'll do a little on-field chat.
In person, so we don't have to do the dual computer phone action. But It's been fun. Thank you to everyone that tuned in. Thank you for dropping your comments down below, and enjoy the awesome Field of 48 on the road to the College Cup.